My name's Andrew Bock. I grew up in a small town that's roughly the size of Murchison, right on the edge of the Melbourne metropolitan area. As soon as I could in my mid-20s, I escaped the city and I've lived in Seymour, Euroa, Shepparton and now live in Maribna. I've worked in a range of industries, retail, travel, telecommunications, finance, insurance, the emergency services sector, and now work in water treatment. And I've also studied fairly broadly as well, both formally and informally, fine art, Indigenous affairs, business, marketing, history, mental health, domestic violence prevention, tourism, graphic design, and I'm currently doing a science undergraduate certificate through the University of Tasmania as well. As you can see from that, I've got a range of knowledge and experiences, and I think that'll help me to make good decisions for the greater good of our whole community. From council's perspective, to me it's all about embracing technology, be it rooftop solar and wind, electric vehicles and that sort of thing, revegetation of public spaces where possible, reducing travel and offsetting emissions. I don't see any reason, particularly for the next couple of years, why anyone on council would need to be flying, for instance. But if that is required for particular meetings or lobbying governments in Canberra or what have you, it makes perfect sense for us to be offsetting those emissions. We can look at planning changes as well, requiring be it rooftop solar or other efficiencies in terms of hot water services and that sort of thing. And we also need to look at our transport options. Now, council doesn't necessarily have a lot of control over public transport, but we can certainly make representations to our local MPs and to ministers, both state and federal, to try and make sure that those making decisions above us are making the right decisions for the whole community and indeed the planet. So in terms of the mall, from my perspective, the main problem is that most of the shops along there are for footwear and clothing. A lot of people in our region can't necessarily afford to go to those shops. They'll go to, say, Big W or Kmart and the like instead. Council doesn't necessarily have a lot of control over what offerings are in the mall. I'd like to see us explore any opportunities to purchase even just one of those shops and use it as an incubator for new businesses and different offerings. Not only would that potentially bring revenue to council to put downward pressure on rates, but it would also bring diversity to that space so that it is the asset for the community that it should be. In terms of the sprawl, in terms of shops and the like, I wouldn't like to see that go any further. Supermarkets are the main thing that's, a lot of families visit the supermarket most days. Having one right in the middle of town isn't necessarily going to change that. And obviously, we've already got the Coles there. But in terms of density more broadly, it's all about planning changes. I'd like us, certainly in the centre of town, to be looking at subdivisions and building up rather than out. There are a few areas in Kyalla and North Shep that are essentially a done deal. They're already being subdivided now. But for residential development, we risk losing a lot of our prime agricultural land, which isn't going to do anybody any favours. A lot of that is driven by the state government. So as I said previously, we really do need to, as a council and as a community, be making representations to MPs, ministers, and both tiers of government to make sure that they're on board with what is going to serve us best. So with risk of sounding like I'm handballing to other jurisdictions, public transport is largely driven by the state government. That doesn't mean the council can't have a role, again, in lobbying, but also in supporting our local bus companies who run those services to invest in electric buses and renewable energy, be it solar, rooftop wind, and that sort of thing. More broadly, in terms of reducing emissions from cars and the like, we need to be looking at, again, the planning issue, but we also need to find out why people would prefer to drive, what are the barriers to them changing that behaviour, and obviously bring those barriers down as best we can.